We're now on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. There's a Girsa issue here, maybe it's Rabbi Yochanan, but we're going to take the Girsa as we have it, Rabbi Yonasan. And this is on the second line from the top on Gimel Amid Beis. Mea sheyoshvu lahoros. Now again, even though the Bezna Gadol is made up of 71 judges, but that's the minimum. At least on a temporary basis, they're allowed to add dayanim. Later on, we'll see what motivated them to add dayanim. So now the court is made up of 100 dayanim. Now the Bezdin of 100 dayanim made a mistake. They issued an erroneous ruling. Says Rabbi Yochanan, "Ein chayavin ad sheyoru kulam." Wow. Every last one of the members of the court, even if there are 100 members of the court, have to have agreed unanimously to that decision that you're allowed to eat this particular chalev. And now, with their idea, they realize they made a mistake. And only then, if we have a unanimous decision that generated the erroneous mistake, then there's a par helim dovashal tzibur. Otherwise not. Shenemar. And we're going to derive this from a careful reading of the Pasuk of Vayikra Dalet, V'im kol adas Yisrael yishku. Now, who is making this mistake? Well, fundamentally, it was the mistake of the court. And therefore, the court that made the mistake is kol adas, ad sheyishku kulam. When the Torah adds the word kol, it means that every single last member of this great Bezdin Agadol made that agreed, approved of the decision. It was a unanimous decision and made a mistake. And then the ruling, the mistaken ruling, has to spread throughout the people of Israel. Amar Rav Huna Breder of Hoshaya Hochinam Mistaber. I'm going to give you a logical support to back your Rav Yonasan's statement. The Torah didn't have to say kol. The word kol is extra because we have a rule that applies universally throughout the Torah, that ruba kakulo. The Torah says achirabim lahatas, you rely on a robe. But here ksiv kol adas Yisrael. Why did the Torah have to write kol adas Yisrael? If it's enough that a majority of the judges on the court made that mistake, so why did you have to add the word kol? We would have said that since it doesn't have the word kol, it's always going to be a majority. So why did you add the word kol? Even if there are 100 members of the court and only the majority of them made that mistake and approved that erroneous ruling, that's not enough, because the Torah says kol, requiring that it be an absolute unanimous decision. Now, it's very fascinating to me, although I don't see that he notices this here in the footnotes, that in the parsha of Zaken Mamre, who's chayav for rebelling against the Bezdin Agadol, there the Gemara says that if the decision of the Bezdin Agadol was unanimous, then there is no chayav Zaken Mamre. It's the opposite of what happened here. Anyway, the Gemara asks a different kasha. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, that Horu Bezdin v'yada echad mem sheto o talmid v'roi lo ro. If either one judge on the court realizes that this is not good, this smells really fishy, this is a bad decision, a bad ruling, or even a stagiary, one of those Talmidim who is a scholar and he's watching all the time and observing and learning, and he knows that they made a mistake. And either that member of the Bezdin or that Talmud who is learning and he's Roy La went ahead and relied on the Psak Bezdin and went ahead and ate Chelev. Is bein sha'asu v'yasa imam, bein sha'asu v'yasa achrei, bein sha'lo asu v'yasa harei zeh chai v'nei sha'lo tola v'bezdin. Who could claim I'm not responsible to bring a chatas because there was no negligence on my part? That's only someone who accepts and relies on the Bezdin. But if somebody knows that the Bezdin is making a mistake, they don't have the leeway and the carte blanche to rely on Bezdin, and therefore they're chayav. So the Gemara now is medayik from the language of the Mishnah, Hayu de chayav. This case, he's chayav. Why? Because he is someone that should have known better. He has the ability to come to the definite conclusions about the ruling. He knew darn well that this was a mistake. Ha'acher, but if it was a rank and file citizen, Potter, he relied on the Bezdin, ate the Chelev, and he is therefore exempt from a private chatas. V'amai, holo nigmar hora. You're telling me that the only chiyuv is when there's a unanimous decision, but there is no unanimous decision here because certainly when they called for a vote, this particular member of the court said, I'm not voting in favor of this ruling because I know it's not so. And that's his obligation. So evidently we have to derive from this that we don't require that every single last member of the court approves and joins with this decision, because clearly in our Mishnah there's at least one judge, at least, who doesn't agree with their psak, with their ruling. And for the Gemara, Hachamayaskino and Shehirchin hu ha'uechad behem barosho, that this individual, member of the court, who knows in his mind that Bezdin is making a mistake, but he shakes his head, indicating an approval with the decision of the Bezdin, then there'll be a chiyuv parhelim davashal tzibur, because in effect he joined, got on the apple cart and participated in that decision. So there is a unanimous decision. However, Toshma, we have a Mishnah that says Horu Bezdin v'yoda echemem shetov v'yomar lahen toim atem harei elu pturim. So why is there a ptur here from the Par Helim Dovashal Tzibur? It's because one of the judges got up and he said, you're making a mistake. Says the Gemara, time with the Amalem Toim Atem de Ptur. Why are they put from that Par Helim Dovashal? It's because he said to them, you are mistaken. Hashasik mishnah. If he had said nothing, he remained silent. Chayovim. They would be obligated to bring a par helim davashal tzibur. The gavala hara. And the ruling is a final ruling. V'amai v'holo horu kulam. Right, it's one thing if he shakes his head and nods approval, then you could say he's part of the decision-making process and he has voted. But if He doesn't nod his head in approval. He was just shosak. As we saw in the language of the Mishnah, it says shosak. So then he's not voting in approval with the decision. So then you don't have an unanimous decision. Why then is there a chiyuv karba? And where it says Hamri Hachanami, here we're going to give the same answer. Kigon shehirkin es rosho, bir rosho. And that's considered a full-fledged, active participation in the decision of Bezdin. Maser Ramesharshir raised the following question. The Brisa says, Samchu Rebbe Seinu al Divrei Rebbe Shimon Gamliel, Ve'al Divrei Rebbe Lozer Rebbe Tzadok, Shayu Omrim, again, this is a Mishnah later on, Ein Gozen Gzeira al Etzibur el Kain, Rov Etzibur Yicholim Lamod Ba, Ve'amar Avi'ada Bar Ava. My Kra, what's the pasuk from which we derive this conclusion? That you need Rov Hatzibur Yicholim Lamod Ba, otherwise the Gzeira is Batel. V'ame'era atem neorim, v'osi atem kvayim, kovim, hagoy kulo. So this is a pasuk at the end of Tanakh in Malachi. With a curse you are cursed, yet me do you rob the entire nation. So the pasuk has the word kulo in it. And we said that kulo means every last member, and it was a unanimous decision. For Rubo kulo dami. It says here in the Brisa that Ein goes from Gzera Elim Kain Rov Hatzibur. All you need is a Rov, and if the majority of the people are able to accept the decree, then it's valid. Why not say the same thing with regard to the Parhelim Dovel Shel Tzibur, where it says Kulo, that it means the majority of the judges would be enough to generate a carbon Parhelim Dovel Shel Tzibur Tuv to the Rabbi Yonasan, and this is a refutation of Rabbi Yonasan. So the bottom line is, all we need is the Bezdin to. The rove of the Dayanim and the Bezdin will agree to this ruling and say you're allowed to eat this type of challah. Tiyuvta, and this is a kasha that completely smashes Rabbi Yonasan, who said that you need an absolute unanimous decision on the part of all the judges and even the extra 30 judges that they added. So now the Gemara has a problem. Now we're saying that on the one hand, Rubo Kekulo, the Torah relies on Rov, and on the other hand, the Torah goes out of its way in the parsha of Parham Dov Shel Tziva to mention Kulo. Velamai Koladas, the Yomer Rachmana, Hachikomer Ika Kulam, Havyo Ra, Be'ilo Lo Havyo Ra. Right, the Bezdin has to sit in one place where they convene in the Lishkas HaGozis. And if they are all convened together, then they could generate a Chal Shem Hora. But one of the conditions of the Chal Shem Hora is that they're all in the same location. If one of them happens to leave, then the entire the entire power of the Bezdin falls apart, and they cannot generate a Hora. And that's even if they know what his opinion is on this case, let's say before he checked out. Oh, Rabbi Yeshua, Asara Shiyoshim B'din, and this is a little bit of an agadita, Koler Toli B'tzavar Kulam. If they added extra people onto the court, then all those people will share the responsibility and the punishment if they don't do a good job and if they issue an erroneous decision. Pshita. So Gemara says, I don't get it. Why did I need Rabbi Yeshua to be mechadish this chiddush? Obviously, the more the merrier. The more judges there are on the bench, the more we need every one of those judges to accept upon himself responsibility that in event that he issues and participates in an erroneous decision, he'll suffer the consequences. Like we'll see later on in Mominos, he may have to pay back the Bali Dinim. Hakamashman, the Chiddush of this din is that Filu Talmud Fnei Rabo, even an apprentice, a Talmud, who is just watching, observing, and trying to soak up the laws and understand them, and that's what we call Shimish Talmidei Chachamim, even such a case, the halacha is going to be that he shares in the responsibility. It means he should have pointed out to his Rebbe that, Rebbe, this doesn't click. There's some mistake over here. Now, again, he has to say it in a very honorable way, in a very respectable way. But if he doesn't do so, then he shares the responsibility for this verdict that was in error. Rav Huna Kiavi Nofik Lebeidina, when Rav Huna would go out of the courthouse, out to the courthouse. Maisi Asora Tanoi, the Beirav Lekabe, he would bring along 10 scholars from the base medrash. Ki Hechi de Nimtion Shiba Mikushra. So that each one would receive a chip of the beam. That's an idiomatic phrase. And what does it mean, a chip of the beam? It's like if you're putting up a beam and a chip shoots out, and, Chasrom could hit you in the head. So by sharing the judgment with others, and he brought Asara, 10 scholars from the base medrash, then each person will get less of a punishment, because now the punishment is spread out amongst all those who participated in this erroneous verdict. And similarly, when it came to Treifa, Rav Ashi Kavi Maisi Treifasa L'Kameh. And the word Treifasa means a suffix regarding the Treifa. In other words, they had to paskin whether this is treif or not treif. Is Maisi Asar Tabchi Mosa Mechasya. Rav Ashi used to import 10 butchers from Mata Mechasya, in order that, since they have expertise in examining the animal, they'll share the blame if there was a mistake made. Mosif Kamei, Omer Ki Hechi Dinimtiyin Shiva Mikuru. Each one of them will receive one chip from this beam rather than all of it being on us. So there was a great advantage to bringing in 10 butchers from Mata Michas. And that leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Horu Bezdin v'yadu shetov v'chazmem. So Bezdin realized they made a mistake, and now they rescind their original ruling. Is bein she'viu kaparoson and bein she'lo heviu kaparoson, whether or not they brought the parhelim dovashal tzibur, they did not. Holach v'yasal pm. Rabbi Shimon Pote. Rabbi Shimon says that if this individual relied on the Bezdin and on their mistake, even if chazur b'hem, even if they retracted their ruling, he still is potter. Apparently, he relied on their original ruling. I'm not sure. Maybe he didn't even know that they retracted it. And the Chiddush of Reb Shimon is, even if they already brought the Parahelim Dovashal Tzibur, which be more indicative of the fact that there's public awareness of the fact that the decision and the ruling of Bezdin was erroneous. But somehow he didn't bother finding out about the Parahelim Dov Shel Tzibur. I guess it wasn't splashed on the, front cover of the newspaper. Rebbe Lezer Omer Suffolk. I don't know, says Rebbe Lezer. I'm not sure if we should have let this guy off the hook when Bezdin was choser behem and they retracted their original decision. Why didn't you check that out before you ate the challah? He's going to answer because it never dawned on me, it never occurred to me that maybe Bezdin made a mistake and they're going to retract their decision. That's not enough, according to Rebbe Loza. And now we're in a state of suffix. Things are cloudy. We really don't know. Does he have a tinus p'tur, so to speak? Does he have some sort of justification for what he did or no? He is responsible for what he did. He's liable for a personal chatas, his own chatas yachid. Ezu sofek, yashav lo b'tov beiso. I would say, says Rabbi Lazar, that you know what? He's local. Why didn't he find out before he ate the chalev whether or not Bezdin is still adamant in allowing it? And therefore, says Rabbi Lazar, let him bring what's called a karban asham toli. Whenever you have a suffix about a violation of an isakares b'shogeg, then you bring an asham toli. Holachlo Medinas Hayam, but let's say before Bezdin actually rescinded their original psak, this guy flew off to, the long, to the Far East, then he couldn't have known one way or the other whether Bezdin rescinded their original psak. So he relied on the fact. Therefore, he's not even chayav a karban asham talut, because asham means a certain element of guilt. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Moda ani bozeshu karov liftar minachova. I agree, says Rabbi Akiva, with the assessment of Rabbi Lazar that the individual who went all the way to the Far East is karov liftur. He's more close to being patur because there's no anticipation that he should know that Bezdin rescinded their decision. Minachova. So exactly what would Rabbi Akiva say here? If he traveled overseas and he clearly relied on the court, he could not have known about the court's decision since he was on the road very far away. Then he's not even chayav an asham tolu. So I'm not sure, but it sounds to me like Rabbi Akiva is just repeating what Rabbi Elazar said. Let me just read this one more time. I know we're running out of time here. I don't see it. To me, my impression is that Rabbi Akiva is saying the same thing as Rabbi Lazar. Am I making a mistake? Let me just think. I don't see it. Amalo ben Azai. So Ben Azai turns to Rabbi Akiva and he says, Maishno zeh min hayoshev bebeso. Shayoshev bebeso efshar hoyelo sheyishma, v'zeh lo hoyelo efshar sheyishma. And once again, I get the impression that Ben Azai is just fleshing out the logic here in this distinction between Yoshev lo b'sof beso and Holach lo lemdinas hayam. In the case of Yoshev Tov Beso, he could have taken the trouble to inquire about whether the court reversed its decision. And therefore, there's an element of guilt, and he'll have to bring a korban osham tolui, as opposed to the case where it was impossible for him to check it out because he was out there in Medina Sayyid. So again, Rabbi Shimon apparently holds that even if he's next door to Bezdin and he could have inquired, he doesn't have to inquire. He could rely on the chazakah that Bezdin certainly will stick to their guns. And therefore he went ahead and he ate the chiluk. But Rabbi Lazar, and it seems like all the Tanoim agree with Rabbi Lazar, say that if he's b'tov beso, then at least he's chayav a korban osham. There's some cloudy, ambiguous indication here that he could have done his due diligence and become aware of the knowledge that Bezdin reversed their decision. Weiter in the Mishnah, Horu Bezdin lakar es kol aguf. This is a very strange Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the Bezdin somehow issued a ruling that removes an entire section of the Torah. For example, Omru ein nida min Torah, or ein Shabbos b'Torah, or ein avodas kocham b'Torah. It's mind-boggling. Couldn't find anything so far, but I'm going to continue looking till we never. Harelu P'turim. That's not a mistake within the Torah that we could say, well, let them bring a korban parhelim dovashal tzibur. But Hora Levatel mixas l'kayim mitzvahs. They said that this kind of chaylev you're allowed to eat, this kind you're not allowed to eat. Harelu chayovin, then there'll be a chiyuv of parhelim dovashal tzibur ketzad. Amru yesh nida b'Torah, when you chayav a korban of parhelim dovashal tzibur, that's only if they ruled that there is nida in the Torah, that the entity of the Isur nida exists. But during the 11 days of Ziva, after the 7 days of nida, if she saw one re'iyah, then the law is she's asura lebaila, and she's a shomeres yom keneged yom. She needs a yom naki, and then she's muteres lebaila after one yom naki. She doesn't need zayin nikiyim unless she sees 3 days of ziva in a row. Or, for example, the Bezdin said yesh Shabbos b'Torah, but hamotzim rishus hayok rishus haram potu. They were unaware of the meleches hotzah, which is the Gemara calls it a melacha grua. That's, again, it's hard to believe, but it's something that is within reason. How could they say ein Shabbos b'Torah? I don't know. Yesh avodas kol chom al mishtach ve'pot, right? Mishtach, although on the one hand it's the most profound indication of homage to the idol, but on the other hand, it's not like, a maisa voda, like, sacrificing to the idol. Is in all these cases of miktsas levatel, is harelu chayovim, there'll be a chiyuv of parhelim dovashal tzivur shenemar v'nelam dova. And what does dover teach me? Dover v'lo kol aguf. In other words, it's only a miktsas, it's not kol aguf. So the Gemara says that Reb Shimon and Mishnah says that if an individual follows the ruling of the court, even though the court had already reversed and revoked their original decision, then he's pot. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, my time of the Reb Shimon. What logic is there to Reb Shimon? I mean, Bezdin rescinded their decision. And the answer is whole versus Bezdin who owes. He doesn't know that Bezdin reversed their decision. but rather he relies on the original ruling of Beis Din, and naively, if I could use that word, he ate the chelev. Ika di Amri, a different lishna. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Omer Hoy Reb Shimon Kol Hora Sheyatza Berov Tzibur. If the tzibur knew about this hora, Yachid ha'osel sapatur, and an individual went ahead and relied on the decision of Beis Din and ate the chelev, then potter. He doesn't bring a chatas yachid. Even if the court reversed themselves. That there's only a hora and a violation of that hora to be mechayev a carbon in order to tell the people, are you mezid if you eat this chelev or you shogeg? And by issuing a ruling to the effect that you're allowed to eat this chelev, then they create a shogeg. It's not deliberate. And the Gemara is not happy. Meisvei, could that be Reb Shimon's shita, that since he followed the court's ruling, even though the court reversed himself, he's parted from a chatas yachid. He acted based on the court's ruling without realizing that Beis Din had rescinded their decision. The Brisa says, Parhelim Dovashal Tzibur Sirei Avodas Kol Chavim Betchila Goven Aleim Div Reb Shimon Reb Yehuda Omer Betrus Halishkein Boim. If there's a case of a Parhelim Dovashal Tzibur, who has to pay for it? And the same thing is true about Sirei Avodas Kol Chavim, who has to pay for it? And we're talking about a shogeg. And here we have machlokes between Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda. According to Reb Shimon, the congregation itself that violated this isur has to pay for the carbon. According to Reb Yehuda, the Trumas Halishka, where they collected the tax on a regular basis from Klal Yisrael for karbanos, that's where we take the money to buy the carbon. The carbon is a carbon tzibur, and it should be paid for by money from the Trumas Halishka. So the Gemara asks Samai, according to Reb Shimon, that he patters up a chat, he patters you from a chatas even after the Beis Din issued a reversal, and that's because he relied on the original decision of Beis Din. Is kevan the gavi lehu havile hoda? How can you tell me he doesn't know? He was unaware of the fact that Beis Din rescinded their decision. When Reb Shimon in this brisa goes on record as saying that the money for this carbon was collected from every single member of the tzibur who violated this isur. So this guy who is claiming that he didn't know that Beis Din reversed themselves, why did he pay for the carbon? The whole carbon is brought because Beis Din made a mistake. So obviously he knows that Beis Din made a mistake. How can therefore he hide behind the fact, well, I relied on the original ruling of Beis Din? And the Gemara gives two answers. Actually, three answers. Answer number one, he plays Ema Kagon Shigavu Stam. They didn't even notify him why he was paying these funds. Ema's second answer, Kagon to Lo Havile B'Masa. He wasn't in town, and he therefore didn't participate in the collection for the carbon Parad Helim Dovashal Tzibur. A third answer, Rav Kidach Tanis over the Tanya Ivcha. Rav was of the opinion that we have to switch around the names in the brisa between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon, and therefore B'tchila Govin Lahem Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda who says that we collect the money from the entire congregation, whereas Reb Shimon is of the opinion Lishka Heim Boim. So therefore he didn't even know, because he didn't shell out for this carbon for the Parhelim Dov, because the money was collected not from the tzibur, but rather from the Trumas Halishka. And finally, Tani, with regard to a person who didn't know that Beis Din reversed their decision, he relied on the original decision, he ate the chaylev. Rabbi Meir Machayev, Rabbi Meir says he's chayev. He's got to bring a korban chatos. And the reason is because he should have known about the fact that Beis Din reversed their decision. Rav Shimon says no. He naively relied on the original Psak Beis Din, and he never dreamt about the fact that Beis Din would rescind and revoke their decision. Rabbi Lazar says he has to bring a korban osham tolui because he's in that gray area where there is some element of negligence, but on the other hand, in his own mind, he thought there's no reason to have to worry about it. Now we have a fourth Tana that we didn't see until now. Mishum sumchus amru tolui. What does that mean, tolui? Well, what is sumchus adding over here? Amar Rabbi Yochanan asham tolui ika beinayu. When sumchus says tolui, he means to say that there is no element here of obligation, of negligence. And therefore, he doesn't even have to bring an asham tolui. So now I don't understand the difference between Sumchus and Rabbi Shimon. According to Sumchus, one is only chayav a korban ashrim when there's considerable reason to assume that he had indeed transgressed. For example, a person had two pieces of meat. One was shuman, the other was chelev, and he finds out later that he ate the chelev. But Sumchus feels that here in this case, where he thought that he can rely on the original psak of Beis Din, there's no element of liability. The only thing is, I don't understand how is Sumchus different than Rabbi Shimon. That I don't know. Or Rabbi Zera, and here we'll conclude. Mashal to Rabbi Lazar. What is Rabbi Lazar like? Lama Dover Dover. It's similar to Adam Shachal Safek Chayil Safek Shuman V'Nodalo, and he finds out that he indeed ate the chayil. So maybe asham. He has to bring a korban asham. Polomi boy Lamandi Omar Tzibur Maisi. And it goes without saying that he has to bring a korban asham. Because he should have known that Beis Din rescinded their original decision to Mefarsa Milsa because it's public knowledge. Because who's going to pay for the korban? What's it called? Parahelim Dovashal Tzibur. It's every member of the community, so he'll know about the fact that Beis Din rescinded their decision. Even if a guy goes, he should have asked around before he ate the chelev. So there is an element of guilt, and therefore, according to this shita, he has to bring a korban asham. Okay, here's where we'll stop.